Welcome, everyone, to Deck Building 101. I want to start with a little exercise of imagination. I'm going to ask everyone to close their eyes, and I'm going to say a series of words, and images are going to come into your mind. I want you to find the image that is most important to you and hold on to that image as we go through the rest of the panel. Everyone ready? All right. Close your eyes. What do you love about Magic the Gathering? Is it the worlds that we visit? Kaladesh, Innistrad, Tarkir. Is it those that walk the plains with you? Chandra, Nissa, Sahili. Perhaps it's the creatures that you encounter on your journey. Angels, dragons, Aetherborn, gremlins. Maybe it's the person sitting next to you, the person you play with, your partner, your gaming group, your best friend. One of these things is most meaningful to you. Hold that image in the back of your mind's eye as we continue in this journey. And open your eyes, and let's begin. This is your deck. There are many decks like it, but this one is yours. You will make lots and lots of decks. Some of them will bring you great success. Others, not so much. But each one is yours. And when you build a deck, you become the game designer. You become the strategist. You are the builder. Today, we're going to talk about how you do this process, how you become this person. Each of your decks, as you build them, is a product of your creativity applied to the great and wide possibilities of Magic the Gathering. And make no mistake, there are so many places to draw inspiration from. Was the thing that you held in the back of your mind, was it raising an army of elves to conquer? Was it drawing down a flight of angels? Do you want to outthink your opponent? Outmaneuver your opponent? Is subterfuge what excites you? Or maybe you're the kind of person who wants to burn everything in sight to the ground. I see people, I knew that one.
Yes.
Deck building is a journey, and we are your guides. We're not here today to tell you what deck you should play or what deck you should build. We are here to help you turn this collection of cards into your deck. And I am Drew Nolosco. I'm the game design manager for the social and acquisition group inside of R&D. We are the people who create all of the Learn to Play products. We are also the designers of all of the multiplayer products like Commander, Conspiracy, and Arch Enemy. And I have two members of my team with me here today, and I'm going to pass it off to Shawn Main.
So, if you really want to get started, we're just going to give you, what is the very basic first steps to actually going about building a deck, as well as some helpful tips, some really important things to keep in mind, how to improve your deck, and then we'll have a little bit of time for questions at the end. So, to start with, what is really that first step? How do you go from having maybe gotten a welcome deck in the Learn to Play area, or you've gotten a deck builder's toolkit, or you have a few booster packs? What's kind of the first step? And I would say really the most critical thing is looking at your cards and asking, what's awesome here? What cards are going to get you excited? What cards look like they're going to work well together? Are there any cards that have what we would refer to as synergy with each other? And consider as you start building, what your cards are trying to do. Because every deck has a purpose. And that can mean a lot of different things. It can mean something different when you're building your first deck or when you're sort of going on the Pro Tour or attending the World Championship. So examples of what your deck's purpose might be could be something like, I'm going to summon a lot of creatures, a lot of little aggressive creatures, and then I'm going to play effects that pump up my whole team and give bonuses to all my creatures and overwhelm my opponent with just this swarm of little creatures. Another example might be things that help you get out mana quickly, that help you accelerate or ramp, and then play giant monsters that are going to stomp on your opponent. Or you might want to burn your opponent, that you can just play spells that are going to destroy your opponent's creatures, that are going to be able to counteract everything they do, and then a handful of just big smashy monsters like the dragon here that are going to ultimately close the game and win it for you. Or it might be things like Blue's classic strategy of, I'm going to create defenses, I'm going to counterplay everything that my opponent does, and then I might be drawing more cards than they are, and ultimately winning through a game of attrition and control. So there are a couple important things to keep in mind here. Your deck will be 60 cards. You can do more, but if you think about it, 60 cards is probably the best number to be playing with. That if you've got 2 or 3 awesome cards in your deck and you only have 60, you're more likely to be drawing them than if you've got a stack of 100 cards. Basic deck building rule is you can't have more than 4 copies of any one card. Unless it's a basic land, those are the ones with the giant mana symbols like this, and you can play as many of those as you want. And in fact, it's going to be critical for a long time to be playing lots of copies of them. Then there are some useful rules of thumb to keep in mind. So, one really useful thing as you're starting out is really focus on playing just 1 or 2 colors. Until you want to get really fancy with your mana base and explore really stranger options, you're just going to get consistent mana in your decks if you play 1 or 2 different colors. As a rule of thumb, you want to be playing about 25 lands out of those 60. This can give or take 1 or 2 lands, but 25 is really probably the number to be shooting for initially. You want to make sure you have enough creatures. Creatures are the most versatile resource in this game, that they can attack, and they're continuing sources of damage. They can block your opponent's creatures, and they just become the basic fundamental building block of the game beyond lands. And often a mistake that newer players won't include enough creatures in their decks. So this number's a little bit more flexible, but 20 or 25 creatures is a really good rule of thumb when you're starting out. Also, then what are you doing with the rest of those cards in that deck? Really, the best thing to be doing is be focused on cards that can destroy your opponent's creatures, that can give you an advantage by edging them out, drawing cards, or kill spells, things that will destroy your opponent's stuff. If you've seen more advanced players build, this is often how you'll see them lay out their cards. So I don't know if you can read the mana costs up there, but the important thing is that they're laying out their decks by what can you do on turn 1, what can you do on turn 2, what can you do on turn 3, and making sure that you're kind of efficiently using your mana and that you have something to be doing at every point in the game. It's easy to focus initially on those awesome 6 mana, 7 mana cards that are going to really win the game when you get to that point when you're casting them. But it's really important to also be thinking about the humbler cards, the ones that you're going to cast along the way and that are going to stop your opponent as you go. So going through those basic rules, I would say focus on 2 colors, 60 card decks, about 25 lands, about 25 creatures, and then 10 other cards, especially ones that you're going to be able to use to outmaneuver your opponent.
So one of the things that we've done is we have given each of you a welcome deck. And as you open up this welcome deck and take a look through it, you're going to see that it has a distribution of cards that's very similar to what we've just put on the screen now. And this is a really great guideline for you to build off of. This screen right here is your crib sheet for how the checklist for when you build each of your decks. It doesn't matter what the deck is or what the purpose is or what the source of inspiration is, but there are some basic mechanical parts that have to fit together and intermesh for the deck to achieve the purpose that you conceived it of. So keep your eye on this. Keep this one in the forefront of your mind because it is your guide for avoiding all of the basic mistakes that trip up deck building.
All right, so now you've got your deck in hand, and let's think about some of the ways that we can start improving your deck. So first and foremost, in my head at least, the most important question to me is, was playing this fun? I mean, that's what we're all here for. And also, does this deck match your play style? So for me, one of the most enjoyable parts about Magic is that I can have a whole bunch of different decks that kind of express the different moods I'm in. So maybe at some time I want a deck that's more aggressive, or another deck I want to be trickier. Maybe I'll play a blue deck then. And I've definitely come into a situation where I've got this one friend in my play group that, boy, I would love to grief that person. So that's just, my honest opinion. So yeah, there's all kinds of different decks that you can make and all different play styles that you can kind of cater towards. So once you've made your deck, just kind of look at it and think about, was this fun to do? Is there any way I want to tweak it?
Mel, what are you playing right now?
So I actually play a lot of Commander, and I have this one Obnixilis deck. And this is old school Obnixilis that prevents your opponent from searching their library. So when you've got that one opponent who wants to play a combo, you can be like, no, you're not going to actually do that.
The griefer and the outmaneuver kind of.
I've got the griefer deck, but I've also got the more fun kind of decks. Angels and elves are always a fun archetype to play. Elves are really fun because you can get that tribal thing going on. But yeah, these are all just kind of some examples. What do you like to play, Shawn?
I like to play red decks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree with Shawn here.
And Drew, what do you like to play?
I am definitely one of the burn everything in sight players.
Man, we are all very, very close in the desire for destruction, it appears.
I'm a man of simple tastes. If it can burn, I'm sure Chandra can help me burn it.
Indeed. All right, so now once you've sort of looked at cards and decided how do I want to change my deck, then start putting cards in and trying them out. And one of the things that Shawn brought up is look at your mana curve. So how many cards, for example, cost 1 mana versus 2 mana and 3 mana? If you want a more aggressive deck, then you probably want to focus on lower cost cards. So, if you want it to be more aggressive, put a few of those into your deck and then, try it out, play test it, and go have fun with it.
Mel,
yeah?
This sounds an awful lot like what we do in R&D all the time.
Yeah. It's a hard job, but somebody's got to do it.
So this playtesting thing, that's basically how we do it at work, right? Like how we create decks and make sure they're the right decks.
Yeah.
This can't be a coincidence.
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of the way that we work in R&D. We'll find some cards that are cool, like build-around kind of cards that are exciting. That's, maybe it's an exciting creature theme, like angels or elves. Or maybe it's an exciting play style, like something that lets you draw a lot of cards. And then we just build around it.
Do you remember at the very beginning when I said you could be the game designer? That the act of deck building is in itself game design? I wasn't kidding. It really is. As you build a deck, you are doing the same things that we in R&D do every day, day in and day out. As we build decks for you, as we build decks to test our new cards, you are participating in the act of game design when you build decks. And that is really exciting.
Yeah, Magic is very much a game designer's game, I would say. And it's all about having the different building blocks and the toys that you are getting to combine as a player and that you are bringing to the table to play with your friends. And so it is very much like playing the game is an act of creation.
Yeah, absolutely. So where are some places where you can get more guidance? So we're kind of just here giving you guys the introduction to how to deck build, but where are other places that you can learn from? So one of the things that we'd highly recommend is playing some Magic Duels. So Magic Duels lets you play Magic anywhere. You can play it from your phone. You can play it from your PC. And it has a lot of helpful features. So it'll do things like give you tutorials on how to play. It'll also help you track your mana, so it'll automatically tap your lands when you want to cast a spell. It's an interface that'll help you just try out new decks. And one of the things that I love about it is that it's also got this single-player mode where you can learn about the newest story that Magic's going through. So, for example, the Kaladesh expansion is just coming out for Magic Duels, and you can play through interactively the story beats of the Kaladesh block.
Magic Duels is also really good to try out deck building in a very, very low difficulty environment. The deck builder will help you out. It'll give you suggestions. It'll show you some of the basic archetypes for each set. That is, play styles that we've built into each set. So collections of cards that will work well together. So it is a really, really good place for you to practice deck building, particularly with cards you may not have yet acquired.
Yeah, absolutely. So another exciting thing that's new to this block is going to be that, starting with Kaladesh, we have Planeswalker decks for the first time. So Planeswalker decks are going to feature some unique cards, 5 of them in fact, and each of them is going to have an exciting face card that can be a Planeswalker. So these are sort of pre-made decks that you can buy off the shelf and then customize it and make it your own. We've also got the Deck Builder's Toolkit. So Shawn mentioned before that a lot of this game is all about taking these building blocks and making things out of them. So the Deck Builder's Toolkit contains a lot of these sort of seeds for different types of decks that you can make. So it'll give you the start of various archetypes for decks, and then you can sort of build off of them.
So what's in the Deck Builder's Toolkit, guys?
Yeah, go ahead.
So Deck Builder's Toolkit contains a huge just number of cards. It'll also contain a bunch of different lands that you can build all the different decks that you want to from, including some 2-color lands, and it has a number of booster packs. So this is a great opportunity when you're first playing to just get everything you might need to really get started building your own decks, really.
Yeah.
And we put out one for each block, right?
Yep.
So there'll be one for Kaladesh coming out?
Mm-hmm. So another great question to ask is, what are decks that other people play? So there's a lot of different sources for other people's deck lists that you can find online. We have our own curated lists of decks at magic.wizards.com on our main website, and we're constantly putting out articles that have different deck lists, and you can find all kinds of decks from theme decks to decks that the pros are playing.
You might even find the World Championship top 8 decks in there.
Yeah. Also, we'd recommend once you've got your deck in hand, then head off to Friday Night Magic at your local game store, and you can find some new opponents, and they can show you, what decks they're playing, and you can try out your deck against other people's decks. So at this point, I guess that's most of what we got.
So we wanted to spend a lot of time in this presentation asking your questions, because we talk with Magic players all the time, and there are tons of questions, really good questions that new players ask about deck building. And so we have out in the audience Mr. Matt Danner. Raise your hand, Matt. Mr. Matthew Danner is going to facilitate you guys asking questions, and we will answer them about all of your deck building concerns, needs, and questions. Raise your hand if you have a question. Oh my. Oh, we got one over there.
For your other cards, do you prefer permanents like enchantments or instants and sorceries?
I am so sorry, we're not getting that on the monitor.
So the question was, for your other cards, do you prefer instants
Sorry, we're
or
not
sorceries?
getting you either, Matt. Oh, no.
Was it instants or sorceries? Yeah. So their question is, for the other cards, you guys looking for instants, sorceries, artifacts? What should my other cards contain? So I've got my creatures and spells. What are the other cards?
Sure, so the question is, aside from lands and creatures, what are the other cards that I shouldn't be including in my deck? And the number one answer is, ways to deal with your opponent's creatures, because it's most likely that your opponent is going to kill you with their creatures. So you need ways to stop that. And now creatures can block. Clearly, you can leave your creatures up to defend, but you need to have a little toolkit of ways to stop your opponent's creatures. So if you're playing white, you might play enchantments that prevent your opponent's creatures from attacking or blocking. Or if you're playing red, there's my favorite go-to solution, which is to burn everything to ashes. Green you can fight, which means that the two creatures you can pick your creature and the opponent's creature, and they will deal damage to one another equal to their power. But there's a wide variety of ways for you to stop your opponent's threats from killing you. And that is the basic answer.
There's also, we were giving that as the baseline. I mean, there's obviously also cards like enchantments and auras or artifacts that are going to be useful in pumping up your own creatures. That's a useful second thing to also be considering as part of your decks. I've seen often newer players, the mistake they make is it's so much fun to build your own monster, and it really is, that you end up with twice as many auras that are going to pump up your own creatures as creatures that are going to be useful to put those auras on. So you just want to make sure that you're thinking about what those cards are going on to. The other obvious answer is, as you get into the game more, Planeswalkers are another type of card, and they are complicated to describe all the intricacies of how they play, but they are sort of the stars of our game. They're the real protagonists that are part of the storyline and everything, and their cards tend to be exceptionally powerful. If you go to the welcome decks, the welcome decks won't contain Planeswalkers, but the Planeswalker decks that Mel mentioned that will be coming out sometime soon, each of those does contain one unique Planeswalker. If you are looking to acquire those cards, that's a great place to find them. And those tend to be very, very powerful, and because they'll give you different effects that they can do every single turn of the game.
And then the third option is, if your deck is very, very tightly themed, and I'm going to turn this over to Mel in a second because she talked about a deck that is pretty tightly themed earlier. If your deck has one specific theme, you can often find things that make that theme better. So, for example, Mel, what did you include in your elf deck to make your elves better?
So with elves, there's a lot of kind of tribal lords. So there'll be like an elf lord or something that will say all elves get +1/+1, or there can be enchantments that say all elves will get some ability keyword. So when you're making a deck, I guess all of these extra cards that aren't creatures that you put in are going to depend heavily on whatever theme you decide on going into.
Hope that answered your question. All right, next up, I think that gentleman right there.
So my question was actually a good players in a competitive environment are going to need a resource to learn how to build efficiently without spending a lot of money on Magic. Do you have any recommendations on budget builds for players in more competitive environments? Budget builds for players in more competitive environments.
Yeah, I'd say generally burn decks tend to be really good for that. And I guess we're all kind of biased because we all really love playing burn anyway. But burn is a really good option for a competitive, kind of easier to understand also deck.
If your focus is going to your first Friday Night Magic, that's a great suggestion to look for something like that. Mel mentioned that on our website, magic.wizards.com, that's a pretty good place to be finding decks like that. You might need to sift through a little bit, but a red burn deck is a pretty good starting point.
In general, very aggressive decks tend to feature a larger proportion of common cards and uncommon cards than other styles of deck play. So, for example, you can build a pretty decent white weenie deck, which is a lot of small, efficient white creatures that can rapidly get into and start disrupting your opponent's strategy and start plinking away at their life totals before they can establish. So those are two good styles to start with as you're making the transition from kitchen table play over to something like Friday Night Magic. All right, next.
We've got one right over. Oh,
We're making Matt run.
Run, Matt, run.
How do you know how many of each card to put in your deck?
Oh, that is a fantastic question. How many of each card do you want to have in your deck? It really varies by, think about, in a variety of situations, how awesome would it be for me to draw this card? So, for example, earlier, Shawn said when he had the, I'm going to go find that slide. Can I grab the clicker?
Yeah.
Shawn was talking about playing cards of each different mana cost and making sure that you didn't include too many that were very high cost cards. I'm going to go back. Here we go. Okay, so for example, that Shivan Dragon all the way over on the right costs 6 mana. Think of all the situations before turn 6 when you played 6 lands where drawing a Shivan Dragon would be not so cool and not particularly helpful for you. So this is an example where you might not want to play 4 copies of it. You might want to play a lower number of copies. Whereas something like, oh, pick a good one. Pick a good low-cost burn spell.
The outmaneuver there at 1?
Oh, yeah, the outmaneuver at 1, right. The outmaneuver at 1, you're going to be able to play from turn 1 on, and you're going to want to have more access to that card. So really, the answer to your question is, how useful is this card in a wide variety of situations? If the answer is, it can help me pretty much all the time, then you're going to want to include it a lot of copies. So there's a second answer to your question, too, and that's how situational the card is. There's a card called Plummet in that, and Plummet specifically deals with flying creatures. So when your opponent has flying creatures, absolutely fantastic. When your opponent doesn't have flying creatures, absolutely useless. So you might not want to play 4 copies of that card in your main deck because it has a more limited number of less utility.
Yeah, and actually, I think one of the biggest mistakes that I made when I was making my first deck is that, like, I love dragons, and most dragons are like 5 mana or more. And so what I'd done was I crammed my deck full of dragons, and it's kind of like when you're going out to dinner and you're like, man, I really want some ice cream, and you end up eating only ice cream, and then you're kind of sick afterwards. So it was a really exciting idea in theory, and then it just turned out not so good. But I would say that if you go to the next slide. I think that this is a really helpful outline. One of the other problems that I had when I was starting out was that I would undervalue how great it was to just have lands, because there is nothing that I hate more than staring at a hand full of really exciting things and not being able to cast them. So I would say definitely pay attention to that 25 lands in a 60-card deck kind of ratio. Make sure you have enough lands, and yeah, make sure your curve works for, a realistic play pattern. You can't have all 5-drop dragons or more. And sometimes it is hard to kind of just wait for your really exciting cards, but that just is generally a pretty good strategy to, your higher cost, really exciting cards. Make sure they're in there, but don't expect to be able to cast them early in the game or to be casting spells like that all the time.
I'll add one other thing. I think they gave you very good, thinky, deep answers. Typically, you can just think of like your deck is going to be more consistent if it's got more copies of the same cards. So often more is going to be better, and playing with that 4 of limit for most of your really important cards is really good, except if you think, would I be sad if I drew 2 copies of this card because they're doing the same thing, or the second copy isn't as useful? That's when I'd really only be including 1 or 2 copies. Usually 4 ofs is really a baseline for your most important cards.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I got another one over here. Shawn, you had mentioned Planeswalkers are powerful cards, and the Planeswalker decks do contain those. Those will release on September 24th with the Kaladesh pre-release.
Yeah, good to know. Thank
you,
Matt
Danner.
Hi. So I have a question about making your deck more efficient. I have a couple decks, one deck in particular. It's running about 80, 83 cards, and it's all very thematically appropriate, but I'm really not sure how to just pare it down and like what to take out.
I would say the first part is if you are having fun with that 80 card deck, awesome. Don't worry about that that's not an issue if you're having fun with it. So that said, if you do want to play it a little bit more competitively or whatever, these are pretty good guidelines. And being focused, I mean, we haven't really talked about things in terms of the rarity of cards. Often rares are a little bit more efficient than commons will be. They're also often more complex. There are definitely decks that are exceptions to that. If you're looking for a 0 level answer, rares are probably going to be a little bit stronger cards. But at the same time, I don't know. I'm trying to think of...
I actually have a follow-up question.
Oh, please.
I want to know what you mean by efficient. Efficient can mean so many different things. Here comes Matt.
Matt's swooping in behind you now. We're making him run.
I just mean I have like a lot of cards that kind of they do the same thing, but I'm not really sure how to decide what to take out.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so this analysis paralysis. You've got a lot of things that are like, which of these is better? And
Yeah.
Okay, what is your deck trying to do? What is its purpose?
It's angels and warriors, so I have a lot
Nice.
of warriors coming out, and I have a lot of things that like buff other warriors. Like I have the chief of the scale, which each other warrior gets +1/+0.
Okay.
Kind of thing. I have stuff like that coming out, but I'm not really sure.
I'll say one thing I've often seen, and that I don't know, obviously, without looking at your deck, I can't say this for certain, but I've seen a lot of people try to have 2 game plans, where it's like, oh, I'm gonna be fast, but also I'll have these angels in here just in case it's slow.
Right.
If you're building your deck efficiently enough that you can assume that your A plan is going to work out, and trying to build it, especially like again without seeing it, probably you could split that into 2 decks, and one be a faster warriors deck that is trying to be super quick and rush your opponent, and an Angels deck that's a little bit slower and more focused on controlling the game or slowing it down until those Angels can win. It might be a little bit more, both of those might individually be more efficient than them combined.
Okay, so maybe not try and focus on like trying to cram it all into one deck. And
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's a great point. Just you can certainly have more than one deck, and the game is very fun, and you can potentially be bringing out the decks that are countering what your friends are trying to do, and or figuring out, just like, as you try more play styles, which one is ultimately the more efficient one.
I had one deck for a long time, and it was a green deck. And every time a new green gigantic thing came out, it went in the deck. And there was someone who was telling me, oh, you should keep it down to 60 cards. So I really had embraced that, and I was like, okay, 60 cards. So a new giant monster would come out, which meant something that made me able to get the monster out earlier or at all would come out of the deck. And finally, I had this deck that was full of like 6 cost, 8 cost, 9 cost, like huge creatures that I rarely ever played. Keep it focused. Pick one of them for each deck and diversify your decks, but not each deck itself. Does that make sense? Cool. Who's next? Oh.
I have a sort of open-ended question for each of you. What's each of your favorite weird decks?
Oh man, I know. Hang
Do
on.
we have time for another panel?
I feel like Shawn.
Are you
should-
about to call out my hippo deck?
Yeah. So Shawn, I guess I play a lot against Shawn, and Shawn has this evil hippo gift deck that is probably one of my favorite things ever. But I'll let him talk about it.
It's a commander deck. If you know that format, you choose a legend, and then it's actually 99 cards. So and you're playing with extra life, and it's often played multiplayer, and I wouldn't recommend starting there, but it's a really fun format if you just kind of want to crank everything up to 12.
It does solve the question of how many copies of each card do I want to play.
And you can only play one copy of things, so it's extra random, and it's just if you enjoy the chaos of the game, it's a great format to go to. But I have as my legend Feldegriff, which is this weird purple hippo creature, and mostly the card is very friendly because it gives your opponents stuff. And for a green mana, you can give someone else a 1/1 hippo token. which sounds like this great way to make friends in multiplayer, but I'm using it really to be sneaky and with cards that punish your opponent for having lots of creatures, or cards that, like, every time Suture Priest, every time your opponents get a creature, they lose a life. So now it's just this machine gun giving away hippos, and
It's
a pretty sweet
gift-giving
deck.
machine gun.
Okay,
yeah.
so Mel, I have a question for you about this deck.
Okay.
So the first time I played against Shawn
I was
playing
not
this deck,
expecting to be on the spot here.
you make a deck that features a purple hippo as its commander. What do you? So the first time I played against this deck, I thought, in retrospect, that I should have realized that something really, really bad was going to happen to me when Shawn had Fildegriff as his commander. But I actually bought into the sort of like pleasantly donating, and I figured there was going to be something else. Did you realize how?
So, you guys might know that Shawn is the creator of Conspiracy 2, which is a game format which encourages you to make friends and stab them in the back. So this deck plays in very well to that archetype. So my personal favorite deck, I like to call Grenzo and his Dungeon Pals. So Grenzo is a card that is one that likes variance a lot. This is from Conspiracy 1. And so the whole flavor is that Grenzo is this guy who's the warden for the prisons in Fiora, in the city of Paliano. And he has all these friends who are imprisoned in the dungeon. And so what he does is, for 2 mana, he'll look at the bottom card of your deck. You don't know what it's going to be. But if it's a creature who has power equal to or less than Grenzo's power, you can put it into play. So it's this fun game of, like, you've got this pile of cards, and you get to stare your opponents in the eye and be like, what could be on the bottom of here? Who's Grenzo's newest dungeon pal? Then you get to put it out on the table and watch the sad look on their face, and that really makes me happy.
It's a really fun deck.
Yeah.
Drew?
So your question was specifically about bizarre decks. Oh God, there's so many. Currently, I'm playing a commander deck who its theme is I can either play basic lands or cards that are mythic rarity. And additionally, I must have traded for all of them. And originally, it was a 5-color deck that had Progenitor.
What a baller deck!
Originally,
Jerome's big.
Yeah. I learned a very difficult lesson. The only 5-color commander I could get my hands on via trade was Sliver Queen, which I didn't immediately realize would cause me to die instantly as soon as I revealed it as my commander, but apparently it has that text written on it. So now I use Progenitus, but I had to cut down to 4 colors because I wasn't able to cast anything. So now it's Progenitus is my commander, but I'm not playing red. And no one at work will trade me a Lotus Cobra, which is one of the very, very few naturally mythic mana ramp things. So basically, I sit there for the first 5 turns, and people are like, you're just playing basic lands. That's kind of weird. And then if I'm not dead yet, it's like, Avenger of Zendikar, and then, something else really disgusting, and then I just play a mythic or 2 every turn until people realize what's going on and kill me, or I've won.
And I know that we're talking about Commander, and Drew's talking about his all-mythic deck,
I
while
know,
we
I'm
have
sorry.
basic deck summary up on the PowerPoint.
I'm sorry, you did ask the question, what was my weirdo deck? I also, as a not commander answer to your question, I really like cards that make your opponent discard cards from their hands. So I have a deck that is not very good, but stuffs as many of those into it as possible.
I'm also, for 60-card basic decks, I'm a big fan of green-white humans. That was a really fun archetype to play with in the Innistrad block. I just like the idea of heroic humans of Innistrad who just have had all of the worst things in the world happen to them all the time.
Before we go on to the next question, this is an incredibly appropriate time to have an interjection about game designers and how they think. So we're here talking about all of this. We play decks that are super weird, and we do this and we do that. And in fact, the hallmark of the best game design skill is the ability to create things for people who aren't like you. The ability to empathize with what someone else has as their motivating factor and their motivating drive, and be able to get into their mindset. So even though we're talking about playing really bizarre things, and talking about a discard deck, sometimes things that are not super fun for the opponent, not for me. It's a testament, and if anyone out there is seeking a career in game design, one of the most important things that you can teach yourself is how to figure out what makes the person who is going to be playing your game happy and what do they need. And it doesn't need to be the thing that makes you happy. And when you become a skilled game designer, you realize that you're more frequently designing for people who are not like you than designing for people who are like you. So, game designer interjection.
I thought
off.
you were going to take that in a different direction. I thought you were going to talk about, Magic is so many games for so many different people. And, you can go off in one path that is, the hyper-competitive, let me figure out the most efficient thing to be doing at every single turn of the game, and I'm going to go and play competitively on the Pro Tour. Or you can go down these paths that are like Commander, where just, I'm going to play whatever I want, and it doesn't matter because it's super casual and I'm just having fun with people. And those are two, like, Magic simultaneously contains both those games, and that's pretty cool.
And pretty equally awesome, because the answer to all of these questions that I'm hearing today really is, except for the technical stuff, what is it that you, the questioner, really, really enjoy? And that is the right answer. The right answer is not what someone else is playing or what you're seeing somewhere else. The question is when I play Magic, what is it most excites me about playing Magic? And you can always find the path to the correct answer from that, thinking about that yourself.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. Like, as a person who's on the story team, the things that draw me in are beautiful pieces of art and really awesome story characters. So, I mean, there's all kinds of things that you can choose as the seed for your deck. And I've definitely made decks that are just centered around a card that I thought looked really cool. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think that's fantastic. And I think it's great that Magic lets you do that.
I've seen crazy people who do things like all one artist as their... which is awesome. I love that exists.
All white border cards.
Yes, and Ethan's a troll.
All right, next question.
You got one right over here. You had your hand up? Oh, yeah. Please go ahead, stand up.
And then,
So I'm really into the Eldrazi's, but they're really expensive. So is there a way to get more mana out?
yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Somebody before had asked this question about artifacts in particular. So there are a lot of artifacts that focus on getting you mana. So one of the things that you could do is play artifacts that get you mana. So then, in addition to your regular land that you're getting mana from, you can also get it from artifacts. I've seen a lot of green decks that play Eldrazi and that also play some artifacts for mana. So the nice thing about a lot of green creatures is that they are not only bodies that keep you defended or can attack in the early game, but they can also tap for mana to help you get your really big creatures out. And green is actually a color that's kind of built around really big creatures. So there's a lot of cards in green that can help you do that. And those are generally what we call ramp decks, decks that ramp up the amount of mana that you can get turn by turn.
If you're playing Eldrazi, you're also going to be playing cards that will create little Eldrazi scions, the little 1/1 tokens, that have the ability you can sacrifice it and get a colorless mana. Don't be afraid to sacrifice your Eldrazi scions to ramp out larger Eldrazi. Those little dudes are helpful, but getting some gigantic Eldrazi monster, if that's the goal of your deck, don't be afraid to sacrifice some of your own resources in order to achieve that goal.
I also will say that's a really fun deck to play on Magic Duels.
Yes.
And just a really fun deck to play in general.
Yeah.
Yeah, over there. And then in front. Oh, no. Hello.
Hi, I was just wondering how many Planeswalkers would you normally include in a deck?
Ooh.
That is a great question. I would say Planeswalkers tend to be very powerful, but you want to make sure you're able to protect them.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't want so many that you're not able to actually... If you're just casting a Planeswalker every turn and your opponent is killing it every turn, that's not going to be useful to you. And usually... we haven't really talked about things like the standard format, which is often what people play in tournaments and is just the most recent sets, basically. There's only a handful of Planeswalkers that are out at one time and in standard at one time, and usually you can only fit one or two of them in a deck. But
I had to check myself, and I'm really glad Shawn jumped in because my answer was going to be all of them. Put them all in your deck. Every single one, 5 colors, all the Planeswalkers.
There are a number of Planeswalkers who can create creature tokens. So, for example, the Chandra from Oath of the Gatewatch can make elemental tokens. Those are more for attacking, actually, and not for defending. But what's another example?
Gideon frequently makes...
Gideon's a great example. Gideon makes soldier tokens that can sort of
that can
act
defend
as-
him, so that's very powerful.
Exactly.
And if you're going to be playing a Planeswalker deck, go back to Oath of the Gatewatch set and find all of the Oath cards, which are enchantments that help you and help your Planeswalkers and make them better. And Gideon's Oath, for example, creates some token creatures that will help you can block to protect your Planeswalkers. So it really, again, depends on the purpose of your deck, but think more about how expensive are the Planeswalkers that I'm fitting in. Don't put too many expensive ones in, unless your deck is like, all Planeswalkers, that's my job.
I mean, I also would say, being focused on 1 or 2 colors, you're not going to have a million options. That it sure is tempting to add another color to splash, sorry, I'm using jargon, but splash is the term that we'll use if I'm focused on 2, but also creeping into a 3rd color, let's say. But if you're really focused on 2 colors, you're not going to have a million different options for Planeswalkers, and you might just want to go build another deck if you're thinking about it. If you've got a sweet red-green deck that's got Chandra in it, and you are playing Kaladesh and you open Saheeli, maybe that goes in a different deck instead of trying to cram all of your Planeswalkers into a single deck.
And I think we have time for one more question.
We got one more question.
Hi. As somebody who's actually really new to the game, do you have any opinion on which color is easiest to learn versus which is the most difficult?
I'm going to do a quick answer because we only have about a minute and a half left. It really, think about what play style works for you the best, and if you find that synergy between what you want to be doing and what the color's purpose is, you will find it to be a better play style for you. And that's really the answer. But
I think Drew is giving you a noble answer, but I would
play
say...
red, burn everything.
I would say burning everything is super fun. Green just often has the best creatures, so it's often really a very satisfying one to play, especially when you're new to the game. And blue is often... it's the game if you want to sit there and think every time your opponent does something, and that's probably a little bit more satisfying once you've got some more reps under your belt.
Yeah, I'd say blue is a little bit more particular about its timing, and that can be a little bit difficult to sequence sometimes. Whereas green, you can kind of play things at a more...
I mean, you get to be proactive.
Green's creatures are bigger. They just get to roll over everything in their way.
Yes, it's true. It's super satisfying.
All right. Thank you very much, everyone. I hope we were able to give you a little bit of insight, get you to think a little bit about what you care about Magic, and use that as a touch point for building your decks. You will have many decks. I hope they are better because of you having attended and listened to this panel. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. Sorry for throwing that.